Well, good morning, church. Proverbs chapter 18 this morning. 3 Proverbs here, all about how you conduct yourself in conversation. I wonder how you tend to conduct yourself in conversations. Well, the first verse here, verse 2, I suppose it's speaking about what brings us pleasure in a conversation. So fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Foolish attitude is not to enjoy the moments where I grow in knowledge, but rather to delight in when I get to tell everyone else what I already think. I wonder if you've seen that opinion in people before. My wife once told me of being a governor for a primary school, and there was a local MP who was also a governor, and he came to one of the meetings. He didn't usually show up. And through the meeting, it was clear that he wasn't listening at all. He wasn't following the conversation whatsoever. But occasionally he would pipe up and come to life and declare some profound opinion that was completely unrelated to what everyone was talking about, completely unhelpful for the conversation at hand. He took no pleasure in understanding, clearly, but delighted in airing his own opinions. And everybody left the meeting feeling, well, he's a bit of an idiot. There's something foolish about delighting more in telling people what I think than growing in the things I don't understand. And yet I know that I find this attitude in myself. What is it for me personally that I tend to enjoy most in conversations? The moments that I learn, or the moments that I convincingly tell everybody else something? What is it that we find pleasure in conversation? Is it airing our opinions or growing in understanding? Well, verse 13 then moves on. It's related, but slightly different. This is more about when we speak. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. My goodness, how many arguments would be transformed if we took this advice seriously? To answer before listening. We tend to think that's not too big a deal, a kind of minor character flaw, but notice the second half of the verse. It is folly and shame. If this becomes characteristic of how you talk to people, that's quite serious. It's foolish and shameful. I came across a podcast about parenting, and it was talking about that moment where a toddler is tantruming. And their advice was, instead of answering the child immediately, try and make sure that the child feels listened to. So instead of just correcting them, if the child is saying, he took my toy, he took my toy, he took my toy, you start by saying, he took your toy, he took your toy, he took your toy, and matching their emotional intensity. And when you do that, the kid goes, yeah, and then calms down, and then you can move the conversation forward. It was listening before answering and making the person feel listened to before answering. The more I've thought about that, and it works fairly well with our kids most of the time, but the more I've thought about that, the same pattern is true of grown-ups. If I answer before this person feels listened to, almost always that doesn't help. We know how that feels, don't we, when someone is telling you something that you don't disagree with before they've understood what you're saying. Very hard to listen to them. So when do we speak in a conversation? Well, this would recommend that your first port of call is that we listen. Don't answer until you listen and help the other person feel listened to. Verse 15 then, I suppose, is speaking about the attitude behind both of these other verses. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. Notice the for there. In other words, the second half of this verse is going to be the basis for the first half of this verse. How do the discerning acquire knowledge? Well, because the ears of the wise seek it out. The ears seek. Again, this is speaking about listening. I came across a piece of advice in a secular book recently that I think captures this quite well. It said, whoever you're speaking to, assume the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't. Assume the person you're speaking to, whoever they are, whatever stage of life they're at, assume that they know something that you don't. That was a great way of capturing the attitude here in this verse. If I do that, well, then that's going to help me listen before I answer. That is going to help me take pleasure in learning from this person rather than telling them what I think. Instead of just watching the time go by until my chance to talk. See this moment as an opportunity to learn and to grow. That is wisdom, the book of Proverbs would say, in how we speak. Now, before we come to an end, I wonder for you, in what situations do you most need to hear this advice? Is it your conversations at home or at work or at church, Bible study perhaps, or with your friends? When do you most need to remember the advice here? Let's pray. Father, I pray that off the back of these verses, our conversation would be full of grace and seasoned with salt, so that we would be those who listen and understand before we speak. Amen.